Hi, I'm Victoria Lisi. I teach the drawing classes over at Ames Community College in Loveland, and today we're going to learn how to draw spheres. Spheres can be intimidating, but it's possible to use a template. And I'm going to start with the ball on the table, and I'm going to just sketch it in with a template because no one can really draw a perfect circle. So for a ball, which is artificial, you would want a sphere. And I'm just going to shade it a little bit. And I'm going to add the shadow that it casts. And I'm not going to do this very completely because I want to go to the other shapes. The next shape is the apple. And the apple, I don't need the template because it's a natural shape, so it is not as a perfect circle as the ball. So I'm just going to sketch in the apple. And I always sketch a little bit lighter when I start, and then I go back and get darker details as I proceed. Now one thing you want to notice about the apple is I'm looking down at the apple. So the stem, it's not here, it's down here. And this is a perspective situation. If the apple were at a different angle, I might see it very differently. So I'm going to just sketch in this apple. And I go back and I make my lines darker. And sometimes I can always erase if I don't like something. And there's a highlight that I see right here. And I'm going to draw a circle around this highlight because I want to preserve the highlight. And I'm going to leave that area white. And then there's a cast shadow that the apple casts from this angle. And this is always going to depend on your lighting. The shadow could be quite different in a different scene. And then we have the shadow on the apple. And one thing I'm doing is I'm sort of following the curve of the apple with my shading a bit. And then you can get very dark with your shading on the apple. This is going to be the darkest area in the drawing. So you want to get it nice and dark. So build up your shadow. And you want to keep the roundness. So as you see, I'm doing the lines in a sort of hatching motion. And I'm also trying to get the stem. The stem is quite dark. And I think I'm going to use a slightly darker pencil to get some of these really dark shadows. So you see I'm getting the dark stem. And I'm thinking about a lot of things as I draw. I'm thinking where I want people's attention to go on the apple. And I want them to sort of really notice the highlight. I'm going to do a little shading around the highlight. And then there's something called the reflected light. And the reflected light is actually, there's some light from the table that bounces up and hits here, so it's actually a little lighter in this area. Again, I can get really dark. This is a softer pencil, and it will get much darker darks. So I'm going to go back in here and get real dark darks for the shadow. And you can build your darks up. You can go over them. You can go back and forth. You don't have to just go in one direction. You can do little circles. There's all kinds of different ways to do shadows. So I usually go over my shadows several times to build up a nice dark image. And you want a lot of contrast in your drawing because contrast is what makes your work pop. It gives it drama and it makes people notice it. So I don't know how this is showing up on the film, but to my eye, it's pretty dark. So I'm getting some nice dense darks on the shadow. And I'm looking careful how the shadow, it goes slightly behind the apple. And again, I'm just going to keep going with my shadows. And there is a sort of a highlight that goes all the way around the apple, kind of like that. And I mark those because I just want to remember where they are. I'm going to outline the apple a little more, get more shading in here. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a blending stick. Blending stick gives you nice, soft. It allows you to soften very easily and really makes the whole thing look a little bit more realistic. Although you don't, this is just one type of shading. There are several different kinds. This is what I call shading with the blending stick. And you can also use a chamois cloth and go even quicker. You see how that's starting to, but I don't want to lose the highlights, so I'm going to go back in with an eraser and lift out these highlights. And again, the shadow is actually a little bit darker in here. And then it gets lighter as it goes down. And there's these interesting little striations in the apple that I'm going to sort of emphasize. This is not a color, so you're going to try to give all your information with just black and white. And sometimes it helps, it really helps when I'm squinting my eyes right now. And when I squint my eyes, I can see the shading much better on the apple than I can if my eyes are open. So I want to squint my eyes when I look at the apple, but when I look at my drawing, I want to open my eyes. So squint, and I can see now that there's a darker shadow right here. But then when I look at the actual apple that I'm drawing, I don't want to squint. Again, I want to erase. And smearing is always a problem, especially with a soft pencil like this. So I'm going to erase. But this is just go back with eraser and with pencil, and I just go back and forth and gradually build my apple up. And I'm going to outline it a little more just because I want it to pop. And drawing is always a decision between what you see and what you want the viewer to see. Sometimes you want to emphasize some things more than others because you want the viewer to notice it. And it might not be that prominent in what you're actually seeing. So this is an apple roughly shaded. And I could spend hours on this, but I'm not going to in this demo. I'm going to move on to the rose. And if you look at the rose, it has another oval shape or spherical shape because it's a natural object, and it does have a very spherical shape. I'm going to do it very roughly here. And actually, I think roses are very difficult to draw. But I'm getting this sort of round shape, and then I'm going to go in and define the lines that go around it that hopefully will indicate rose. So I started with a rough sphere, and then I'm making it more rose-like. And an open rose is much harder than a bud. So I advise you to do buds before you try open roses, because they're quite hard to do. And again, I want to get the shading. And the stem. And I'm not going to complete the stem because I'm going to do the pine cone behind it. But and if you notice, the shadow from the stem is separate because the top of the stem lifts up a little bit from the table. So it's actually separate slightly. So it's all these interesting shadow things that shadows really make your subject fascinating and interesting and tell you how your subject relates to the surface it's lying on. So this, by having that shadow up, it tells me that the stem is actually raised slightly. And again, I want to get some values in here, and I want to get my shading. And there's some shading that goes along here. And it's dark inside. And this, I actually see a faint shadow cast by this stem on the rose itself. So getting all these little nuances give your work character. And again, I can go back and erase. That line isn't quite that prominent. And again, I'm not using any color, so I'm trying to say rose with just value. And again, if I squint my eyes when I look at the rose, I will see the shadows a little better than if my eyes are open. So you want to remember to do that. If you can't see the shadow, you're having trouble with your shadows, squint your eyes when you look at your subject. You know, the last one I'm going to do is a pine cone, and that's really challenging, so I'm not going to complete it, but I will get it started. And again, it's a sphere, and I'm going to do it very roughly. If you look and you squint your eyes when you look at the pine cone, you'll see it's basically a sphere, and then it has a series of, again, this would take all hours to do properly, so I'm just going to sort of indicate a pine cone. But I want you to just see the underlying shape of the pine cone. And notice the outline, that it's not a smooth sphere. It has ridges. So I'm just going to get those in. And has a very spiral-like shape, how the pine cones come out. The little, I don't know what they're called. And they overlap each other. And again, this is going to be a very rough pine cone because we want to move on to other things. But the other thing you will notice about the pine cone is the shadow it casts is also it's lumpy. So it's not smooth like the others. And that's going to help people understand that it's a pine cone. So we'll shade that in. I'll shade this in. And you get sort of a rough idea that that's a pine cone without me necessarily completing the whole pine cone and doing all the intricate shading on it. But you can see how spheres are a part of nature, and if you master the sphere, you will be able to eventually draw faces and people very well, because the face is essentially a sphere. So I hope you've enjoyed this little demo, and we'll tune in for more. Thank you.